Hello, everyone. This is the fifth of a series of conversations with Miki Kashtan as a response to coronavirus and the ways we are responding to it and can further we can respond to it. The conversations are accompanying a series of articles Miki has been writing in last 3 months in the same context. So I'd like to start with the first question. Miki, in your article, you mention that capitalism's victory on reducing work to jobs. And whereas actually work is a process of attending to three basic needs, you say sustenance, dignity, and meaning, it's tragic to see that the majority of human population either cannot meet any of those needs through their jobs, or even if the pay is sufficient, dignity and meaning are lacking. I have a sense that it's relatively possible for us to relate work with sustenance, but it's harder to relate it with dignity and particularly with meaning. We talked about the narratives of social systems last time, and I see now that we have another narrative here telling us that work is not supposed to be meaningful. It's supposed to be sustaining, and that's it. In my culture, even meaning in work is even extra or luxury, or seeking meaning in your work can bring troubles. So it is hard for us to see the connection between work and meaning and dignity. And also the difference between work and job might be very blurred for many of us. So this brings a couple of questions to me. Like, first, can you say how you differentiate work and job? And also, can you make the connection between work and meaning and dignity a bit more visible for us? And also, if there's time, maybe a bit about how this narrative is feeding the continuation of the current system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just am thinking, if you go from the world of humans doing things to the world of science and physics, if I remember accurately from the days when I learned physics, work is the process that converts input to output. I may be misremembering, but there's some way that at its depth, the process of work is to take something and make something of it that is useful. And I'm thinking as I go to try to really understand what is work. It is an activity or a set of activities that support human life. Animals don't work. As far as I can tell, this concept, this process, this experience that we call work, of course, I can't get into what is the experience of an animal. I mean, we have believed that we can do that, but I don't think we can. There's something about exertion, that we bring something into it that creates something in this process. So for example, in Jewish law, there's one day a week in which you are commanded not to work. And it is interesting what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do. And it is related to creation. You're not supposed to create things. So for example, turning on the light switch, it's not really effortful. But the people who observe the law, observe the Jewish practices, they don't turn on electricity for 24 hours, for about 26 hours every month, every week. Because when you turn on the switch, you bring something into existence that wasn't there before. There's something in that. And there are several words for work in Hebrew. One of them has the same root as angel. So there's something interesting. I like going back to the roots of Hebrew because it's an ancient language that was then frozen for a very long time and then was revived. So you can see meanings that we no longer have. So how is that related to meaning and dignity? If you think about, compare, for example, a person who is creating a pair of shoes. They take all the different ingredients, they work with them, and at the end, there's a pair of shoes. Can you see intuitively that that has more meaning and dignity than all day, every day, you make the holes in the shoe where the laces will go, and that's all you do? You're not actually making anything. You are doing actions, but you're not creating. You, in the end, are not part of the product. You remain invisible. Yeah, does that help with this? So a job is a relationship that makes a commodity out of a human being. What is it? You're basically selling yourself to someone else for money. And at its depth, the contract says, I will do what you tell me to do. So you give up your autonomy at the most fundamental level. Even if you are in a managerial job, it isn't your own purpose that you're carrying out. You're carrying out the purpose of someone else. So there isn't an expression of who we are, which is the foundation of meaning. And it will take some time to tease apart, can there be dignity without meaning? Can there be meaning without dignity? Meaning without dignity, I can see. Many of the people who are doing what are now called essential jobs, they can have meaning in their work because many of those jobs are jobs that have care as part of them. And when you have care as part of your work, it gives you a sense of meaning. But when that care gets commodified, made into something that is measured by how many people did you actually give pills to if you're in a nursing home, or how many, even doctors, how many people did you see? How many patients did you see? You're not seeing enough patients. You need to move through the patients faster. There are essential things about the capacity to choose, the capacity to make meaning, the capacity to bring myself that are gone, and the dignity of being treated as a person, as something sacred. So that is what I see in that. When I look at pre-industrial times, people had much more of a relationship to the whole of what they were doing. There was a direct relationship between what they were doing and purpose. So much of what people do now doesn't have any clear purpose. Even people who get well paid. In the article, I talk a lot about, I mentioned the book by David Graeber, Bullshit Jobs. And a bullshit job, the definition of what is a bullshit job is actually subjective. No one decides from the outside what is a bullshit job. The person knows there's really no purpose to what I'm doing. There are many, many fascinating stories in that book of how many people get a lot of money essentially to do nothing. And there are various reasons which are well beyond this conversation to get into. But fundamentally, we are not doing work in order to sustain life. this is part of what gives it meaning. We are doing work in order to somehow sustain ourselves so that we can go back to work tomorrow to do the same thing, but not mostly in order to care for all that lives, which is what I would want work to be. And you also asked, how does this narrative sustain? I can quote Marshall Rosenberg, who uh, put together the body of work known as nonviolent communication. And he basically said people who are connected to their needs don't make good slaves. So even on the physical plane, in order to convert people into slaves, they have to be torn away from land and from community. Those of us, if we were connected to our needs, to wanting meaning, to seeking dignity, to seeking expression, we wouldn't agree to do most of the work that is done by people on the planet today. So our willingness to maintain a narrow focus in that way, a kind of a resignation before even trying, I think is part of what sustains the system.
I do have sort of a follow-up question to that discussion about dignity and meaning in work. So you write in the article that UBI and UBS, Universal Basic Services, don't necessarily, they don't fundamentally give people a sense of dignity. Like it's not within that itself. If we were going to make a social program where everybody gets food or everybody has housing, sounds like there still needs to be something else that's in that conversation that could help humans have dignity in receiving those things. So
It's not exactly about receiving those things. It's more the way that I see it. What we do, I keep coming back to this. Most of what most people do is not designed to sustain life. It's designed to enrich some people, to protect the flow of resources to the few. And in a variety of ways, it's designed to maintain the social order as it is. And, just think about, you know, there's so many jobs that fall into these categories. All the fee collectors, all the bureaucracies, they're gatekeepers, they're resource holders. They keep people from being able to have relationally based access to resources. Not to mention the financial industry, the insurance industry, the advertising industry, a lot of things that are not creating outcomes that are designed to nourish life, care for everyone to live within the means of the planet. As I was reading things, I've been reading a lot in preparation for writing these articles. There was this one article, I think I mentioned it in this piece, where basically the person says, people have been consuming less, and that's a problem for the economy. We need to get people to consume more in order to get the economy going. And it's like, how can you not be embarrassed to say this? You're basically saying, we are getting people to buy more than they need so that we can keep the economy going. There's something about that is that real? It's like it's turning things upside down. Is the economy made of the flow of resources going to where they're needed, or is the economy made of getting people to do what they don't need to do so that we can have enough something to keep a machine going that isn't actually serving life? Um, so both universal basic income and universal basic services are only changing things at the consumption end, not at the production end. So it just it 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 is a step. It is a step because it lifts up. If it all works, it will lift up the bottom, the baseline, and might create a situation in which resources are redistributed. Because there is a mythology that a lot of people have. I really and truly believe that there are a lot of people who have a lot of access to resources who genuinely want to eliminate poverty. They would like there to not be poverty, and they don't see that their wealth and the poverty are two sides of the same coin. I read somewhere, I don't know if I will ever find the quote, somewhere someone said, there's no need to get rid of extreme poverty. If you get rid of extreme wealth, extreme poverty will just disappear. Um, and so that is one of my big concerns about it. It's not, I am fine for there to be universal basic services of everything. I just don't think it's enough to restore what I would like to see on the planet.
Mhm.
I read a couple of days ago this big alarm around birth rates and how it's plummeted, and the conversation around the number of bodies needed to sustain the consumption, to sustain the economy. And I remember having a conversation with someone around, well, aren't we saying there's too many of us anyway? But I'm wondering how you can tie birth rates and the population size that the system can actually hold, and what is actually happening, and why it's actually a good thing that we are being reduced in numbers.
So one of the things that I see overall is that in the ecosystem of life, absent people, without people, there are processes that maintain population size for all populations, not talking about humans. If there's a very beautiful short video, about 5 minutes, it's called something like When Wolves Make Rivers. And it's about Yellowstone Park in the United States. And what happened when they reintroduced wolves. So many things changed because in the absence of wolves, the deer could proliferate, and they ended up destroying certain parts of the ecosystem because they didn't have anything that was controlling their population. Ultimately, they would die because there wouldn't be enough grass, but along the way, they would be destroying. So I don't remember the entire sequence, but there is enormous, almost to me, almost spiritual, like an order. The shape of the rivers in Yellowstone changed because the wolves came, the deer moved, the grass moved, the grain moved, the something moved, and all of it is now in a different balance. When I look at patriarchy, patriarchy is not about men and women. Patriarchy is about humans and life. It's an anti-life movement. It's a fear of life, fear of death. And there's a paradoxical thing. You're trying to control death, and you end up creating more death because we cannot improve on nature. Sooner or later, it will come back around and create a problem. So what have we done? We have eliminated everything that nature has within it as a way to keep our population within limits. First, we eliminated large predators. Then we came up with all these medications for tiny predators. Then we came up with vaccinations. Then we came up with all these measures for extending life. Then we came up with all these measures for reducing death at birth. We are acting as if we have a contract, and the contract says, I'm supposed to be able to live a life that is disease-free, to get a house, to get a this, to get a that, to have a guarantee that I can conceive, that I can carry to term if I'm female, but that whoever, that we have that guarantee that once there's conception, there will be birth. Once there's birth, there will be life. Once there's life, it will continue. We are not allowing death into the picture. I'm in one of the future articles, I'm planning to write more about this and think this through. The relationship that we have with death, we are not accepting death. And the result is that we're creating much more death as a result. Both soul death, degenerative disease death, chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders, and a host of things. And meanwhile, the population is growing and growing because there's nothing that reduces it or keeps it from growing.
Constrains it in that way, yeah.
Constrains it, exactly. That's the better word.
I think, I guess maybe what I would like to hear is when people come to me and say, well, it's sort of like the survival of the fittest theory again, back to Darwin's idea that the fittest would have the most access to resources and therefore procreate the most. They somehow use this mindset to explain why there is differentials in access to resources for human beings and why it would make sense that some would live longer than others. It's really messed up, and I find myself trying to attempt to simplify.
I want to say in brief, I haven't actually read Darwin himself, but apparently if you actually look through his writings, the concept of survival of the fittest shows up maybe once or twice. It's not the main thing.
It's not the main thing. It was used as a social construct to make scientific response. Yeah.
And he had nothing to do with what has come to be called social Darwinism.
Yes, exactly.
And there are other strands within evolutionary biology that are gaining ground. And there are strands that have to do with cooperation driving evolution forward, with mutual adaptation between organism and environment, not like a static environment into which an organism adapts against all other individuals. With the role of epigenetics in preserving different traits. So there was an experiment that was done. I don't have the details, but an experiment that was done over the course of only 30 years by selecting, I can't even remember how it was, but they were able to change the way that a population of foxes looked over the course of 30 years, only by training some of them to be friendlier. I wish I had it at my fingertips. So I think we more don't know than know.
Yes. Well,
how,
the last thing I'll say, because I would like you to also mention this, since you introduced me to her thinking, was the book Braiding Sweetgrass, because that I thought, oh my gosh, the beauty and the poetry around bringing us back into nature as a way of controlling and balancing our own population.
yeah. So this book directly speaks of, I would call it maybe co-evolution of, in this case, plants and humans, where contrary to what people would think, a plot that is not harvested at all was not doing as well as a plot that was harvested according to ancient wisdom. So there is something about developing a relationship with a plant where the plant sustains the humans and the humans sustain the plant, and both thrive. Whereas if you leave the plants alone, there aren't going to be enough nutrients. And if you overharvest, there isn't going to be enough strength within that plant population to continue. So the mystery of relationship and interdependence is far beyond what, you know, regular Western science has figured out, although they're coming around very quickly now. I recently came to say this kind of flippant thing that if you want to play God, you need to know what God knows, which is the interrelationship of all things. And we play with things without knowing the interrelationship, and then we destroy.
And the last thing I think I would like to hear something about is, how does it, like, in my mind, economic models obviously don't grapple or capture this intricacy and this mystery, and which is why we're putting the planet's health on the line and together with our own. So going back to purpose, because it's really a big question. You know, we're thinking about jobs as having purpose, but it's our life that we seek purpose for. So do you see it intertwined with being part of nature as part of purpose?
Oh, this is a very deep question. I think that, you know, one way that you can see the human experiment, if I am life and I'm engaging in experimenting all the time, one of my big experiments is humans.
Yes.
Humans is a big experiment, and the question that this experiment is trying to answer is, can conscious choice coexist with the flow of life? How can we integrate conscious choice into flow? This is what purpose at its best is. Because I don't think that there's purpose inherent in life. I think purpose is something that we make, and we make it through conscious choice.
Yes. Thank you.
With all the things that have been discussed, I'm thinking of the narrative of survival of the fittest and how it ties to this idea of merit. Some people are doing better in society, gaining more, and how that narrative is slightly shifting nowadays. More stories of cooperation, like you said, or in biology, people like Lynn Margulis are being more talked about, and the idea of convergent evolution, which is fascinating. So with all this, I'm also thinking of how, like, I'm thinking of, I think, transition, and maybe one element could be that we start talking about a maximum wage rather than a minimum wage, and the idea of inheritance coming into a pool. And I'm wondering how these can all tie to shared risk as well.
Yeah. Yeah, first, a tiny bit about biology, which is, if you look at behavior of trees, trees have a very, very intricate collective existence beyond an individual tree, connected through the root system in the entire forest and also through the roots of the mycelium, all the different species of fungus that are there. And what the trees do is they redirect resources to trees that are struggling. Exactly the opposite of survival of the fittest. And the reason is, as where I read it, the reason is if a tree gets sick and falls, there's going to be a hole in the canopy, and that will change the conditions within the forest. So it serves everyone to sustain every tree as long as possible so that the whole can thrive. So even in non-human populations, there is collective wisdom that we're just beginning to grasp. And in terms of human populations, I think we have a very robust social form that has existed and continues to exist and is now talked about more than it used to be, which is the commons. The commons is a form of a shared risk community. It is, and you know, there's this thing called the tragedy of the commons, which here is how much narrative and ideology rule. So this person wrote this article called The Tragedy of the Commons. And I can't remember his name right now, but then some 30, 40 years later, a woman does a massive study around the world and refutes the hypothesis, shows why it doesn't work. So much so that she gets a Nobel Prize in economics. But when you look her up, and when you look up Tragedy of the Commons, she's invisible compared to an article that to a concept that has been proven to be incorrect. She's still invisible because of the strength of the narrative. So the thing about the commons, the tragedy of the commons assumes that a commons is just a thing that exists there, and anyone can do whatever they want, and therefore people will essentially get into resource wars with each other and destroy the commons. That in reality, a commons is not just the resources, it's, as everything, relationship. It's relationship between physical resources and humans. And it's a relationship that is based on the knowledge of the humans that if they want long-term sustainability, they need to nourish the commons and nourish each other. So whatever there is gets shared because everybody's survival depends on it. Yeah, that now we no longer have it in the industrialized world. The commons are almost entirely destroyed. But they exist still in big parts of the world, and there are people now working on recreating them. And it's a big challenge to recreate because in the absence of community, most people in the global north and even many people in the global south now become hyper individualized and frightened about sharing resources. Because sharing resources only means I will have less. It is hard for our minds to see the possibility of having more through having access to something that we don't own. Ownership is the only security that we believe we have. So creating communities of shared risk is a profoundly subversive activity.
Yeah, this connects to my roots, which is I'm from Central Europe, so we are post-communist countries, and I think the anti-communist discourse is also obstacle to restore the commons, because there is the idea that if it's nobody's, which was states originally, so it doesn't work. So I would like to connect it with question, because so in the human history we are trying to experiment, to search how to organize ourselves and take in account the needs of everybody, and there were failures also. So my question is, what are the learnings from the socialist experiments, either in Soviet Union or or Eastern Bloc or kibbutz? Because there is the risk in our region that we will throw all in the discourse.
Yes, I often think about Eastern Europe having three shocks in the 20th century of things imposed on people in different orders in different places. Communism, World War II, capitalism. It's not, I don't have any sense of romanticizing life under communism, and still to have it be kind of like torn up and replaced with very, very intensive forms of capitalism. I believe it was a shock, and I know people in Eastern Europe, and I'm told that that is indeed true, that it was quite a big shock for people to get out of this. So your question is, what can be learned? I think central planning is not going to actually support people in being able to flow, because central planning is another form of control. It is coercive. Now, of course, it's in the capitalist countries, it's made to be a kind of like cautionary tale. See, you don't like coercion, right? If we do any of the things that you ask us to do, we will become like the communist countries. You don't want that, so shut up and accept what we give you, because there really is no alternative. So it becomes a binary discourse, either or. And there is no learning, no possibility, no options for something else. So still, with a lot of complexity and a lot of cost to a lot of people, there are certain things, if we're talking about universal basic services, communism did that. It was much harder to go hungry, unless there was a famine or an induced famine or something like this. But in the normal daily course of events, you didn't go hungry. You had a place to live. Capitalism was brought into this country, and suddenly you had prostitution, you had a rise in crime, you suddenly had people on the street again. So there is something in there, in the commitment to care, to provide the basics for everyone, that even with all the terrible flaws of central planning and communism and the political repression, this part is a success. And the question is, can this be integrated? Can something from that be integrated? It's a big question. So one of my questions that emerges from that is, how can you coordinate and still keep things distributed? Because if you coordinate and centralize, people lose autonomy. They lose their capacity for agency, for working things out with themselves and with each other, which is essential. So there's something about keeping most decisions local that to me seems like a huge fundamental principle of anything that has the capacity to sustain itself, because almost everyone now on the planet depends on large institutions that are far away. So I don't know if I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, because you probably know more about that history than I do by a lot.
Well, yeah, I have one thought connected to the Corona times. That maybe it's helping, at least to some people, or it's my hope, to go beyond this binary thinking, because as we see what's happening, for example, in the United States, what does it mean that there's a problem with insurance and not accessible healthcare? And we still have these things. I remember reading one of your stories from Future, describing the traffic, how the shared public traffic and so transport. So I was actually thinking, oh, actually we still have most of this what you are describing in the story. So yeah, like seeing the shadows of these experiments, both capitalist and so can be, yeah, it's helpful. Yeah. So that was one of the thoughts.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that one of the things that is deeply ingrained in the capitalist narrative is that the only reason why people would innovate or exert themselves is for an external incentive. And so there's baked into it a really negative view of human nature. And almost 2 years ago, I was in Cuba for about 10 days. And I saw things that to me make it really clear that we orient to purpose and to care and to others' needs naturally. We will orient towards our own sustainability only under conditions of fear and scarcity and powerlessness. There is a lot of innovation in Cuba, in health and in education. You know, so there's a lot of deep rewiring that is necessary in order to shift into a world in which care for needs is the basis of everything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I noticed all these things and all the things that I'm hearing. Deep down, what you said, a really deep rewiring is happening. Is that's the portion I feel really despaired. And you were talking about earlier about jobs and work and bullshit jobs. And it just sort of like, yes, I knew it. I've been doing for years and it's killing my soul. My job is bullshit. I'm not doing work. And the little time I find to do work is not creating any, it's not creating anything to sustain my life. Other than spiritually, and it's good for my soul. But physical material needs is not being met by doing my work. So that separation and experiencing the people around me with the real voice, still talking about like, this is my body and my freedom, I'm not gonna wear the mask. Don't tell me to wear the mask. That level, and I don't know even how to put it, is such a gap in what we are trying to see, what we are trying to see in the future, and what we are trying to see what we can do now versus the people's, I don't know where they're at.
I am almost understanding where the piece about the mask is related to the piece about the work. Can you say one more sentence to help me make the connection?
I'm looking at the discrepancy, the huge gap between what I believe and what the work versus what I'm doing. So my value and what I do every day, there's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And
I can speak to that. I don't understand how the mask thing relates to that.
mask things relates to what we are talking about, care for all, and we have that nature that goes back to where you're
Got it.
rewriting.
I got it. Yeah. So I think the question that unites these two strands is the question of, you know, are we damaged beyond repair? Have we reached the end of the road in terms of humanity's capacity to recover its place within the flow of life? That's where I see the two strands, because without getting into the question of masks and their effectiveness and why we want to wear them or whatever, that is a separate question. But the assertion of individual autonomy above almost all else, I think, is the essence of what worries you about the mask thing. Not whether or not I think somebody is actually going to get more or less of a disease if people are not wearing the masks. There's something about that assertion that can be frightening. And it is an example. And the other example, the one about the work, is more at the institutional level. It's kind of like both the institutional level and the internal level are so far from the vision that is so clear and calling to us. And is it still possible to get there? Yeah, that is the question, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the first thing that I want to say is sometimes the most important thing to say in everything that is being talked about. And that is 3 simple words. I don't know. And it's you know, like, here we are, an interview that is going to be going on YouTube, where I am the expert answering questions and all of that, and I'm not supposed to not know. And to me, the injunction to always appear like we know what we're saying is part of the problem. So to me, believing that we know or that we ought to know worries me deeply. So as a person committed to transformation, I am owning my lack of knowledge. I have no way of knowing. I am imagining that a day will come that we will know if we're actually going towards human extinction, which I don't know, but if that's where we're going, there will come a day when there will be no way back. And we will just know, just like, you know, when an individual is struggling with a life-threatening illness, for a long time, you don't know, will you manage or will you not manage? And then sometimes a day comes and you know, that's it. There is nowhere else to go. You just know it. I know it because I have accompanied a number of people. So I know that, but there's something about leaving open possibilities for as long as you don't completely know. That is the place where faith can live and can thrive. So that's the first thing. I don't actually know. What I do know is that the work is very uphill because, just the other day I was talking to someone who actually shares many of my values and vision. And she was being remarkably honest, which touched my heart very much. She doesn't have enough strength to live by her values. When the whole world is going in a particular direction, she doesn't have enough strength. So then she is in that cycle of house, mortgage, needing a high-paying job to pay the mortgage, kids, needing to give the kids what the kids want, and this cycle that keeps you trapped within the system, even when you know that the system is destroying everything. And then there are people who don't even know that something else is possible, don't even know to want it. And then, even when we want it, even when we work in that direction, it's so deeply ingrained in us. The scarcity, separation, and powerless are so deeply ingrained that within movements for change, the conflicts, the wars, the mistrust, the suspiciousness continue to unfold. So I can say I don't know. And there are days when the despair knocks me out completely. Kind of like the thought that it takes, the thought form that it takes is, who are we kidding? That's the despairing thought. And then there are days that the not knowing gives me enough strength to say, since I don't know, I will do what I can. Wherever I am, I will do what I can. Because what I do know is if I give in, nothing will change. If I don't give in, maybe something will change, maybe not. So that's all I can say in response. How is that for you, Kyoko?
That's yes. Yes, and the couple of things coming up is I was remembering what you talked about, the part of the theory of change. We create a pocket in our immediate, and that's I keep going back. And also it's more than a couple of things I wanted to say is the friend that you're referring to, I can so relate. And there is a guilt feel around it because as long as I'm in that, I don't have a strength, I'm still part of the problem.
Yes, and then it goes back to what we talked about in earlier times. We cannot solve the big problem individually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When we create a community of shared risk, it's easier for each individual because there is something that holds us together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was just also, I want to say one more thing. It was so touching and very connecting to me that you feel, I know you've said it before, but just hearing again that there's a days that you feel completely disappear.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, we all together. That gives me some sense like, I'm with you, Miki.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, I think this is one of the things that is very strong for me is that when we step into any position of leadership, I want us to remain accessible and real and not kind of like step into pretending that something suddenly we know all the answers. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to connect to something which was at the beginning and now, this not knowing. That now we are speaking about not knowing as something we kind of have to accept, or it's good maybe. And I feel it's really necessary because you mentioned, Miki, that the life, the expression of life, it's actually the experiment. And if I'm sure, then I do another communist regime of central planning because I know how to do.
Yes.
So I mean, to stay humble in this experiment is one part. Yeah, is one part. So it's
Yes.
actually, we need to learn how to not know. I mean, learning to unlearn the certainty or something like that. Yeah. And the other piece which I feel connected
Yes.
to that and was strong from the when I was reading the article, that it's again connecting to the purpose, to your wish, that you don't know, but it's not the same not knowing as the government. So I try this, I try that, without any system thinking or any purpose. So the not knowing combined with the vision, like the
Yes.
uncoercive care
Yes.
of everybody's needs. Yes, it's
yes,
stronger.
because if I don't know what will happen, but I know what I'm experimenting with, what I'm trying to do, and where I'm heading. Yeah. Thank you.
I actually have a follow-up question too. So I'm wondering, with like a socialist program, I'm wondering what problems you see would arise if needs were met because we think that we deserve to have them met.
I
You know what I'm saying?
I don't have it's not coming to me.
So you write in the article that so in a socialist order where resources flow and needs are met because we think that we deserve to have
There
them.
is a calculation, there's a concept of equality. And equality in that sense is actually dehumanizing because it makes everybody into, you know, the same cog. And it isn't how life actually is. So then your actual experience, your actual needs become obliterated. You become, oh, you are female, this is your height and this is your weight, so you need this amount. But it's not about, you don't have the agency of knowing what you need and engaging again in relationship, because it is only in relationship that we can solve these equations.
I think I connected, Miki, in your article a lot about the piece around garbage picking and how that can be rotated and the dignity in that. And so maybe that can be a, if you can talk about it a bit more.
Yes. So the piece about essential work is work that is directly related to meeting needs. That is really what is essential work. If it's not directly related to meeting needs, then, you know, those jobs didn't have to sustain themselves. It doesn't, I mean, for the moment, we're not looking at the cost to the people who were having those jobs that can neither be done from home nor are considered essential, and they're basically wiped out into poverty. But once you do have essential jobs, you know, the same, David Graeber didn't say much about it, but he also has the category of shit job. And shit job is a job where, you know, the conditions of the work, what you're actually doing, is difficult physically and emotionally, arduous, saps your energy, very different from a bullshit job. There are even jobs that are both bullshit and shit, you know. But fundamentally, I think that essential jobs would be divided into maybe 3 categories if we recreated the world. One is those things that are really necessary and no one wants to do. And those are the ones that I propose would be rotated. One is the ones that are really necessary and have intrinsic meaning for at least some people. So, for example, caring for the elderly, caring for children, things of this nature, there will always be people who will be called to do it at least part of their time or part of their life. I'm not worried about there not being enough people who want to be with children or enough people who want to do a variety of jobs like this. That's the second category. And the third category, I suspect, is jobs that are essential because our needs have been taken away from community instead of done locally. I have a belief that if we relocalized economies, there will be all kinds of things that people are doing, such as meat packing, which became a big deal in the United States in the last number of weeks, because there wasn't enough meat, and so there was, you know, like reopening of factories without caring for the safety of the workers in them. But why would you need to have that if, I mean, I know there are going to be people who are going to say that even killing animals for food is a problem. I'm not going to get into this discussion. What we kill to eat, whether it's only plants or plants and animals, that I'm leaving that aside. Assuming that there will still be the eating of animals, it would make complete sense to me that animals would be killed locally, distributed locally to people without much need to pack it and ship it and figure out the refrigeration and all of that, because you won't do it beyond what is needed. It will be much shorter cycles. So it's very hard for me to do, you know, like this degree of detailed planning. But I think overall, I think there are those 3 categories. Overall, I think we don't need such long work weeks. This is also something that in the book Bullshit Jobs, he talks about, that if you actually calculate the amount of work that isn't bullshit that people are doing, then it really would be the dream that we were told 100 years ago, that if we only got enough here, then people's work week would be only 15 hours a week, and that will be enough for everyone. And his conclusion is, yes, that is true. And the rest of the hours, we do things that are not necessary. So working out what is really necessary, even if now it's essential, what nobody wants to do and what some people will want to do, and reorganizing it, I think it's completely doable. It just requires collective imagination and collective will.